Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another DM's Guild review, my written and video review series where I take a look at the adventures and supplemental material at the Dungeon Masters Guild website. For this video, I'll be reviewing the DM's Guild supplement, Jarlaxle's Guide to Traps, designed by R.P. Davis with Jeromy, Schulz-Arnold, Ken Carcas, D.W. Dagon, Justin Handlin, Bryan Holmes, Hal Howard, and Noel Proulx for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. Review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider using my affiliate links for your DM's Guild shopping and supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Andrew, Richard, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick, Andy, and Chris. And gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy, Yuma, Marcos, Dave, Vicente, Gilberto, Sean, AK, Cert2B, Adam, Dead Lizard Lounge, Sam, Raj, Limpy Spuds, and Jerome. Thank you all very much for your support. Everybody likes traps. That is to say, DMs usually like traps more than players, and if you're following our own D&D show at the moment, we are in the very beginnings of the Tomb of Annihilation, which is based on the famous Tomb of Horrors trap, which is a death trap dungeon. So traps have been a big part of dungeons, probably even more than dragons. Probably should have been called Traps and Dungeons, dungeons filled with traps. That has a bit less of a ring to it. Jarlaxle's Guide to Traps is a book of nothing but traps, apparently based on a previous supplement that was also nothing but traps. And traps have not been explored too much. I don't think I've ever reviewed a DM's Guild product that was just focused solely on traps. Obviously, there's been a lot of magic items, been a lot of adventures, been a lot of player characters, but just getting love for traps is pretty cool. So I was really looking forward to this. Really great cover art here. I like that it focuses on a in-universe character. That's always fun to see. And I was mainly looking to see, does it, first of all, expand upon the trap rules and information given in the Dungeon Master's Guide, as well as in Xanathar's, which the Dungeon Master's Guide was only like, 3 pages of traps, and it had some kind of samples in there, like the classic poison needle trap shooting out of a keyhole kind of a thing. And then Xanathar's had, I believe, another like 10 pages, which had even more rules about how to create these complex traps, as well as magic traps, and how they can scale for different levels and all that. So does it do a better job of letting me design traps? And then on the other hand, does it also just give me traps that I can plop down into whatever I want to work with? So the answer to the former is no. I don't think it does a good job of necessarily teaching you how to walk through how to design traps, which granted is probably already in these rule books. So I don't know how much more we would need, but I would have liked to see at least something there. As for the latter, this is a 90-page supplement that includes over, I think 60, I wrote down in my notes, 60 different kinds of traps spread out into 3 chapters. There's a chapter on the classic, like, mechanical-based traps, as well as some magical traps. There's a whole chapter on hazardous terrain-style traps, and there's a whole chapter on hauntings, which is a cool idea for specifically, like, cursed or undead or just spirit-involved traps. So that's pretty cool, but unfortunately, it kind of leans more towards quantity rather than quality. And overall, I had a big problem with the tone, the actual written tone throughout this supplement. And maybe this is probably symptomatic of having multiple designers submitting multiple kinds of traps, but the tone varies wildly from one trap to the next. Some of them are, very kind of just straight up as written. This is a pretty normal trap, and that might have some details or might not. And others have this really odd, like, mocking cruelty about it. Like, oh, take that, you stupid bard that knows everything. Here's an instrument that just, like, destroys everything around you. Or stupid fighter that breaks down the door and charges inside. We're going to get you. It was a really antagonistic mentality against players. And others are just super goofy and silly. So it's a very odd tone that just shifted a lot, where I think if the book had done all of at least one of those, maybe I could have understood. And part of the problem is I don't think that's supposed to be Jarlaxle's voice coming through, because in this first chapter there are these sidebars, which are these nice little written, kind of whatever font this is, that is supposed to be Jarlaxle's voice, which is something that we like seeing. And from a lot of the official, obviously we've got Volos, we've got Xanathar's, we've got Mordenkainen's, all of those were written with those sidebars that had those in-universe commentaries. And that is the stuff that's from Jarlaxle, which unfortunately is only in this first chapter, which is a big bummer because I think there's a lot of fun stuff in this with that commentary. So I don't think that weird way and I'll get into some examples so you can see, but it's a really weird style that I wasn't very comfortable with because it just changes a lot, and I really don't like the just straight up cruel mockery of players. And in fact, it even says when not to use traps here, and one of the headings is to punish people. Don't use traps to punish people. A lot of the fucking traps included in this document are straight up I can't wait to punish my players because of this. It's weird. It's weird. It's weird and unsettling, and I didn't necessarily care for that. What I did really like, though, obviously the quantity of traps is good. This first chapter is pretty solid. It gives a lot of advice on when to use traps, how you can incorporate puzzles into traps. It kind of further defines all the different kinds of traps. All that stuff is really, really good. So I enjoyed that first chapter. Chapter 2, which, by the way, at the beginning, notice there is no table of contents. There's no overarching organization to how this book looks. If you have This is kind of a PSA to everybody designing a product in the DMs Guild. If you have a product that's longer than, say, 20 pages, throw a table of contents in there at the beginning. It makes it look so much more professional. It helps the reader instantly organize and see what it's all about. Obviously, if it's an adventure, you should always put some kind of adventure summary, like a one-page synopsis that breaks everything down. But in this case, even if it's just a supplement, I still want a breakdown. If you've got a table of contents, also give me an introduction about traps, and not just this kind of introduction, which this is a forward. Give me an actual, here's chapter 1 and what chapter 1 has. Here's chapter 2 and what chapter 2 has. That way I understand what I'm getting into without having to look at this 89-page thing and say, I don't even know. I read through this whole thing thinking, okay, it's a bunch of traps. And I get to another chapter. It's oh, there's haunted traps. Well, that's pretty cool. I would never realize that had I not made 60 pages through this thing. So there needs to be some kind of organization at the beginning, especially the longer and more stuff that's in your product. You need to have some kind of table of contents organization. There is an index at the back, which is very nice to have, but I need something at the front, at the beginning, that actually organizes everything. So chapter 1, good stuff. Chapter 2 is basically all of your simple and mechanical traps. And immediately we get into some weird tonal dissonance. For example, this part on, let's see, the heading for simple goblin-esque traps, which is a neat idea. So there's a whole, especially for tier 1 players, they're going to be dealing with probably, goblin dungeons or kobold dungeons or areas where creatures are just intelligent enough to set up traps, but don't have a lot of the, technology or magical know-how to actually make really impressive, cool ones. So you've got some very kind of simple classic trap design. So I like that that's kind of a subsection within the trap section. I don't need the header to literally be cheap, shitty traps like kobolds use. First of all, that's not good grammar. Second of all, I don't... yes, this is how I talk, but I don't want to read this. It's very, very odd. It's super weird. And then you've got just regular serious traps on the other hand, which are, they drop you into water with fish in there, or there's just an alarm bell on the door. Those are very classic traps, and that's fine. There's kind of a cute, funny one here, Buzz Off, which is there's holes in the walls, but instead of spraying gas, they spray and it literally says sweet, sweet strawberry jam or honey, and then unleashes some kind of creature that then is, enraged by basically you smelling so good. That's kind of a good kind of funny. The stupid kind of funny is this one that's called Catastrophe and has a taxidermed cat. Look at a cat's butt sitting here, and it just sprays out fire, and it says, "Aren't puns wonderful?" And I guess your players are supposed to understand that means catastrophe, and the whole room falls apart and everything bad happens. That's just a dumb trap. I don't understand the design philosophy behind that. It's just weird. What I do really like, though, is the art. This has really, really fantastic artwork throughout. You can see here almost like classic D&D drawings that you would see in old Dungeon magazine, that really do a good job at capturing how these traps work, which is great because a lot of them you need that visualization. At least I do. I can read about a trap, but unless I'm looking and seeing, okay, how does this actually work in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions or something? And a lot of these pictures do deliver quite well. Not every trap has a picture. Not every trap needs a picture. Some of them are very, very simple, exploding chests, poison needles, this kind of things. But it is nice to get some artwork, and I did really, really like the art, so I will give it that. I enjoy the art quite a bit, but it had just some weird. It had some weirdness that I wasn't too into. Let's see, page 22. Okay. Bucket of Wrigley death. Just this first paragraph. Precariously balanced on top of a slightly ajar door is a bucket. Yeah, just like the old bucket of paint gag from the movies. Again, that's how people talk. That isn't how you should write things, though. It's way too much of a casual tone, unless you are specifically talking as if you were an in-universe character who's talking like that. You need to take on some kind of authoritative. Not you don't have to use like huge long words or anything, but saying like yeah, just like the old bucket of paint gag from the movies. That's a bridge too far. Like, and same thing with the cheap shitty trap thing. I don't like that. I don't like that style of writing. You can write and make it be clever and funny, but don't literally just write like we're just talking, like we're old friends. Like it's not that it doesn't endear me to what you're actually trying to describe here. I didn't like that format at all. Log trap number. I'm reading my notes because it's a 90-page supplement, so I had to write down quite a few here. Log trap on page. Oh, this is the Ren and Stimpy gag. This is also it's log, it's big, it's heavy, it's wood. This one had a twofer. It had one. It had a really, obviously very, very too casual, too trying to be funny name, and then the actual description. Let's see. Closing the door locks the log back. Opening the door releases the log. Opening the door really quickly, like characters do when they make a strength check to force open a door in a dungeon. Lets the log fly toward the idiot tough guy with enough newtons to turn him into a fig Newton. Okay. That's not, everybody's got different style of humor, and humor is a really hard thing to do. That's why, most indie places don't do comedies. They do like horror or drama. I was not a fan of any of the humor that was used here. It just seemed very forced or just out of place or tonally dissonant with what we're doing here. And a lot of it, as I said, is also very, very cruel. Now, there are things that I liked. 33 was a lightning obelisk. The idea I liked here is that they find a keyhole. They need to find both keyholes and turn the keys at the same time. And if they fail at doing that, that makes this lightning obelisk actually increase in radius and in damage, which is a neat a concept for any trap, really. If the players fail the first time, it actually gets stronger. But it just seems like it's cool because it's a magic trap and you can have whatever rules you want. I did like the concept behind that one. And then the maddening mural, very simple trap. It's just a painting that if you stare at it, kind of makes you go crazy. And you actually end up taking a psychic damage and have to roll on the short-term madness table. But if you fail the, I believe it's a wisdom save by 5 or more, then you have to roll on the long-term madness table. So you just get lost in this really creepy painting. So again, that's a simple idea, but I think it's pretty effective and works pretty well. And unfortunately, most of the traps in here are of the simple variety. There's very few complex traps. Complex are ones that like a whole room is like a death trap kind of a thing happening. This one is just kind of mixes two oils together that cause an explosion around. That's fine. But most of them are pretty simple traps that you've probably seen. If you've played like any video games, then you've seen like, the spears coming up out of the ground and all that. This one has half a page of countermeasures to deal with. I do like the fact that every trap does have countermeasures involved. So it kind of preemptively determines, how players can spot the trap and then how players can try and solve the trap, as well as very good details on like each trap's triggering mechanisms, the effects that they have, and all of this on there. That part is at least pretty helpful. And again, I really did like the actual pictures that are involved here as well. 47. Oh, the Throne of Flying. This is a good example of a joke that I did like. This one has in a language, whoever sits on the chair gains the ability to fly. I'd probably use better terminology than that, but the idea is you can sit on it and it's just a spring. Like there's no magic about it. It just launches you up into the air. I think that's kind of funny. And without like literally having this mocking, cruel tone in here, but that's just a funny idea. So there's some good stuff. The fake traps are kind of funny, although very mean. There's a sword that is literally just a glitter bomb, which is really crazy, but it even mentions like, be careful about giving your players magic items, which are actually traps in of themselves, which I agree, that's a pretty difficult thing to do. The barred one. That's another one where they're just mean. Here's a way to get back at that jerk who gets the party out of every jam with their plus 27 to persuasion or deception. No, just stop. Stop being so fucking mean to your players. Like, I don't understand. The entire chapter 1 just said, use traps in a good way that makes sense to tell stories and balance things out and all that, and don't make them like cruel and mockery and just being mean and all this stuff. And then like a third of the traps in here are just fucking bullshit, mean ass traps that even have the meanness in the description. I don't get it. It's not. It just doesn't jive very well with me. You think you're looking at the title of this one, you think you're so clever. This idea that this trap is triggered once the rogue comes in and then solves this trap. This goes back to that old format of like it's the DM versus the players, and that is not a theme that I at all enjoy or abide by. It's the DM and the players working together to craft a really cool story. And yes, the DM is usually antagonistic towards the players, but it's the betterment of the story. You're all in this together. The idea that it's a team-based game and the DM's like trying to kill the players, I guess some folks play D&D like that. I do not and never will. So a lot of this tone, it's what really, really irks me and drives me crazy. All right, chapter 3, hauntings. This is a cool idea. So again, I didn't even know this was part of it because there's no table of contents or anything at the beginning. This is a whole subset of traps that are not specifically mechanical or magical, but are involved like ghostly spirits or something of that effect. So examples, and it uses like religion instead of perception in order to identify, which is really neat. There'll be like children laughing in the distance that can cause you, I think, like disadvantage on wisdom saves. It's just kind of creepy. There's a really cool one that's a portrait come to life, which is straight up like Castlevania or Ghostbusters 2, I guess, in a way. There's actually two of them. One of them is a portrait that's got the moving eyes that just unsettles you, and the other one is the portrait that really does seem like a Castlevania thing, that like a ghostly noble like jumps from portrait to portrait, kind of a hallway of portraits would be really cool. And has all these different abilities and things that it can do. So that's a really, really fun idea for like a spirit-based trap. There's a rats in the walls, which is definitely out of H.P. Lovecraft, that drives players crazy, psychic damage, and causes them to try to use their action to just attack the walls. That's really cool. I like that idea. Unfortunately, there's this one and hazards, which is all like kind of hazardous environment and dangerous environments and hazardous terrain and that kind of thing. Not nearly as many as chapter 2, which were all of the traps that I had the most amount of problem with. So that is had they been more even, I probably would have been more positive on this book, but there's literally 40 traps in chapter 2, which is those mechanical and magical traps. And I believe there's only, or like a little bit over 40. And then I believe there's like a dozen or so each of the hauntings and of the hazards, which is some of the cooler ones. There's this death mist that just causes you to have disadvantage on your death saving throws. Acoustic crystals is a neat idea. It amplifies sound. So if you whisper, it sounds like regular talking. And if you're actually fighting and having a battle, it really amplifies the sound. And I think it actually does a little bit of damage, like a thunder wave spell. And then obviously it alerts like everybody around you. So that's just a neat concept to use sound as a hazardous. Crabgrass, grabgrass, which is a really funny pun on crabgrass, which is a very real weed that is a pain in the ass. Grabgrass, specifically if you're knocked prone, will then grab you and restrain you with an extra, causing an extra strength check to try to free yourself. So that's a cool idea that you would never know that this terrain was actually in effect unless you were knocked prone. So you could have a bunch of enemies that maybe knew about it, and they knock their whole deal is they try to knock the players prone, and then the players suddenly find themselves in a lot more dire straits. Same thing with the grabbing hands, which is the classic like hands coming up out of the graveyard trying to grab you. Again, I love the artwork here. There's a bunch of magnet plates in this hallway, which is definitely something out of like a Tomb of Horrors. Everybody just gets plugged in there, which is really nice. So I think both the hazards and the haunts are way more interesting than the actual traps themselves, to where I wish the focus would have been more on these. And for some reason, I didn't get a lot of the same problematic tone in terms of the cruelty or the goofiness as I did here compared to the others. So I don't know if just certain authors were more on one and the other, and I just didn't like those ones. But for whatever reason, these worked a lot better mechanically. They were more interesting, and I felt like the tone was a lot better, and just kind of what I wanted to see, which was just a regular, straightforward tone, and then allow me, the DM, to then use them and however I want, whether I want them to be more mean-spirited or just something the players have to deal with. So. Yeah, I've got really mixed feelings. We'll go over my pros and cons, but I really wanted to like this supplement, but I just had a lot of problems with the actual way a lot of the stuff was written. All right, so pros, the art. Fun black and white art that showcases many of the trap designs. That's really, really cool to see. So much of the art as I was flipping through this supplement, really, really impressed with it. That was So much times art is just like stock footage or something, or all the artwork is basically spent on the cover page and we don't get much in between. And I think the black and white actually fits really well because these are a lot of kind of old school traps that remind me of that old school dungeon design from earlier editions of D&D. So I really do love how it looks, and it blends well with the actual formatting. The actual text here is just not very nice looking font. Same with the headers, but the background, this kind of parchment paper along with the black and white, that looks really good. Pro is basically just the quantity, honestly. Over 40 mechanical and magical trap designs, that's chapter 2. Over 10 haunting, spirit, or curse traps, that's chapter 3. And over 10 new environmental hazards in chapter 4. I did like chapters 3 and 4 better, but chapter 2 did have a lot of traps at least. Cons, no table of contents or preface at the beginning to let me know exactly what's in here. Especially bad for, again, a supplement that's almost 100 pages long. Cons, Jarlaxle's commentary ends after chapter 1. We get these nice little sidebars that are presumably written from Jarlaxle's point of view, obviously from this designer, but those are really fun to have, and then they just literally go away after that first chapter. That's a huge bummer, and I would have liked to see more of that. At least there's something in there with chapter 1. A lot of them, they just slap a name on there and then never use that actual in-universe character. But I expected it'd be fun to have some commentary, like, oh man, this one's particularly nasty, or, something like that. Make it fun. Cons, inconsistent tone that ranges from casual and goofy to mocking cruelty. It's just all over the place, and I've harped on it throughout this entire review, but I was not a fan of the tone that threatened to take over the otherwise kind of straightforward tone that the book had. And cons, most of the traps are pretty simple. In chapter 2, just not terribly impressed with a lot of them. Like, we get a lot of basic traps in Xanathar's and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and a lot of them are pretty easy ones that I think a lot of folks could honestly come up with. The ones that were interesting, this floor wench, which literally knocks people around, has some questionable balancing. It does 8D. It has a DC of 20 dex saving throw and deals 18d10 bludgeoning damage. Now, come on, even if you've got a trap that you want to scale for like tier 3 and tier 4, you have to assume, unless you've got like spikes on the walls that come out, like, you got to balance that shit out a little bit better. That's kind of nuts. And there wasn't enough, usually when I do these kind of reviews, I can go in and say, okay, I like this one, this one, and this one, and I'm going to explain them. I didn't have a whole lot here. It was more about complaining about these traps than it was praising them, and that's not a good sign. Final verdict, Jarlaxle's Guide to Traps features over 50 traps, haunts, and hazards, but the relatively simple designs and the cruel mockery are unbecoming of the Drow noble. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson, and you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.